On a bright, sunny afternoon, the small suburban neighborhood was alive with the hum of activity. The air was crisp with the warmth of late summer, and the streets were bustling with people going about their daily routines. Children played hopscotch and tag, their laughter echoing through the quiet, tree-lined streets. The sound of lawn mowers and the occasional car passing by punctuated the otherwise peaceful ambiance. The houses were all neatly kept, with manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges, a picture-perfect reflection of suburban life. In the midst of this serene atmosphere, a young boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, was joyfully running around the yard of one of the houses, chasing a stray ball that had rolled away from him. His energy was boundless, and the world was his playground. He was the youngest child of a renowned CEO who had just recently moved into the neighborhood with his family. The boy had yet to fully appreciate the privileges that came with his father's status, but he was a typical child, unaware of the world around him in the way adults understood it. His world was simple: balls, games, and friends. As he chased the ball further from the yard, his attention fixated on the brightly colored sphere bouncing away from him. The game was all-consuming for him, and he didn't even notice the street ahead, where traffic occasionally whizzed by. His little feet pounded against the concrete, his small body still too light to comprehend the danger of being so close to the street. As the ball rolled closer to the curb, the boy took one final, excited sprint to catch it. Unbeknownst to him, a car was rapidly approaching from around the corner. The driver, distracted by his phone, didn't notice the child playing so close to the street until it was nearly too late. The car, an expensive sedan, was moving fast. The driver had failed to pay attention to the surroundings, completely unaware of the small child's presence just a few feet away. The screech of the car's tires, followed by a collective gasp from nearby onlookers, filled the air. In an instant, the situation became a crisis. Bystanders froze, some screaming in horror, others too stunned to react. The car's driver slammed on the brakes, but it was already clear that the collision would be unavoidable unless something happened fast. In that brief, frozen moment, time seemed to slow. The boy, his focus fixed solely on his prized ball, was sitting right in the path of the speeding vehicle. It seemed like the inevitable outcome. But in the midst of this terrifying moment, a teenage boy walking down the street, a black teenager, noticed the scene unfolding. He had been casually strolling, minding his own business, when he saw the vehicle barreling down the street toward the unsuspecting child. In that split second, the teenager's instincts kicked in, and without thinking about his own safety, he lunged into action. His heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted toward the boy, knowing full well that every second counted. The car was coming so fast that it felt like an eternity. The teenager didn't hesitate. With the grace of an athlete and the resolve of someone who knew the stakes, he pushed himself harder, faster, his legs eating up the distance between him and the boy. His mind was singularly focused on one thing: getting to the child before it was too late. As he neared the boy, the speeding car screeched even louder, its tires screaming against the asphalt. The teenager's adrenaline surged. In one swift, desperate motion, he reached the child just in time to grab him and pull him away from the danger. He yanked the boy out of harm's way, diving sideways and taking the child in his arms, rolling across the sidewalk to avoid being hit by the car. The car screeched to a halt just inches away from them, narrowly avoiding a devastating crash. The sound of the screeching tires still hung in the air, a stark reminder of just how close they had come to disaster. In the aftermath, the teenager held the boy tightly, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He was still shaking from the intensity of the moment. The boy, stunned but safe, looked up at him with wide eyes, unsure of what had just happened but comforted by the feeling of being in the teenager's arms. Bystanders slowly began to gather around, some rushing to the scene, others pulling out their phones to document what had just happened. The car that had almost caused the tragedy came to a stop, the driver stepping out in a daze. The other pedestrians who had witnessed the near miss were in disbelief, still processing the fact that the child was alive. There was an overwhelming sense of relief in the air, mixed with the horror of what could have been. The teenager, despite the shock of what had just unfolded, remained calm, gently lowering the boy to the sidewalk. He checked to make sure the child was unharmed, his mind still racing with adrenaline. The boy's parents, who had been just a few steps behind in the yard, came running out, panic etched on their faces. When they saw their son safe and sound in the teenager's arms, their relief was palpable. They rushed to their child, hugging him tightly, tears of gratitude welling up in their eyes. The young boy's parents were quick to thank the teenager, but there was something more in their expressions, a deep, awe-struck appreciation that went beyond mere words. The teenager, still catching his breath, simply nodded. He hadn't done this for praise or recognition. He had acted on instinct, driven by the primal need to save a life. He was humble, even in the face of this heroism. The surrounding crowd began to murmur, commenting on the bravery of the teenager. Some were already talking about how they had witnessed something extraordinary, while others were still in disbelief. But, as the moment stretched on, it was clear to everyone that the teenager had saved a life that day. Not just the life of the little boy, but perhaps the lives of his family as well. The car's driver, who had been too distracted to notice the child, stood frozen on the other side of the street. His face was ashen, his body shaking from the shock of what had nearly happened. The teenager, aware that the driver was still in a state of panic, looked at him for a moment, his gaze steady but not unkind. It wasn't the driver's fault, but the driver would certainly need to face the consequences of his actions, whether that meant legal trouble or something else entirely. But for now, all that mattered was that the child was safe, thanks to the swift, heroic action of a young man who, despite his own struggles, had chosen to act with courage and integrity. The moment lingered in the air, the realization settling in that sometimes the bravest people aren't the ones we expect. The teenager, walking away from the scene with the same quiet confidence that had defined him before, had just become a hero in the eyes of the entire neighborhood. What had started as an ordinary afternoon had transformed into a moment of pure heroism, reminding everyone who witnessed it that true courage can arise at any moment, in the most unexpected of places. On the edge of the suburban neighborhood, the incident was still fresh in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the heroic act. News of the near tragedy spread quickly throughout the area, and in moments, a small crowd had gathered around the place where the teenager had saved the child from the speeding car. People were talking animatedly, recounting the brave actions of the teenager who, in a split-second decision, had thrown himself into harm's way to protect someone he didn't even know. As the story unfolded, an elderly woman who had been watching from her front porch placed a call. "It's important," she said to the operator, "the young man who saved the child. He's the son of Mr. Parker." She paused for a moment, her voice shaking with the weight of the story. "You need to call him. The boy was just about hit by a car, and the teenager, he..." saved him. You need to get the word out immediately. Within moments, the message had traveled far beyond the confines of the small neighborhood. The boy's father, a high-profile CEO who had built a vast fortune in the tech industry, was quickly informed about the incident. He had been on a business call when his assistant's urgent message broke through. His son, his pride, his only child, had narrowly escaped death. He had never expected something like this to happen in his quiet neighborhood, where he lived in the hope of providing his family with a safe and peaceful environment away from the pressures of city life. His heart raced as he immediately disconnected his call and asked his driver to take him to the scene. He needed to see his son. Arriving moments later, the CEO, Michael Parker, stepped out of his sleek, black luxury car. His eyes scanned the scene quickly, and his body stiffened with fear until he saw his son. Standing with the teenager who had saved him, the child was holding onto the young man's arm as if nothing had happened, completely unaware of the magnitude of the event that had just unfolded. Michael rushed toward them, his hands trembling. When his eyes landed on his son, safe and sound, an overwhelming wave of emotion swept over him. His face softened, his chest constricted, and he closed the distance between them, lifting his son into his arms. "Thank God," he whispered, barely able to contain the flood of emotions that had been building inside of him. Tears streamed down his face as he held his son, who was still in a state of shock, but unscathed. The teenager stood off to the side, awkwardly watching the reunion, unsure of what to say. Michael turned to him, his eyes still misted with tears. "I don't even have the words," he said, his voice choked with gratitude. You saved my son. I will never forget what you did today." The teenager was taken aback by the sincerity in the CEO's voice, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to receiving praise. He wasn't used to anyone paying attention to him in this way. He had grown up in modest circumstances, always second-guessing himself because of his financial background, never expecting much more than survival. But here he was, standing in front of the man who controlled a fortune, a man who could change his life with a single gesture. Michael placed his hands on the teenager's shoulders, trying to steady himself, his gratitude still overwhelming him. "You saved my son's life. That's something I can never repay. But I'll try. Please, I have to do something for you." The teenager, unsure of how to respond, simply shook his head. "It was nothing. I just did what I had to do. I didn't think. I just acted." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with admiration for the young man. "That's what heroes do, son. They don't think. They just act. And you saved my son's life today. You deserve more than just thanks. I want to give you something that will change your life." The teenager still didn't fully understand what the CEO was getting at, but he had never been one to ask for anything. He had struggled to get by, working odd jobs just to help his family make ends meet. A life of struggle had been all he had known. But Michael wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number as he turned to his assistant who had arrived at the scene with him. "Get the details of this boy's background. I want to know everything, his school, his family, everything." The teenager's confusion deepened, but his apprehension began to lift as he realized that Michael wasn't just offering him empty words. The CEO's determination and genuine gratitude were evident. Moments later, the assistant returned with the information they had gathered. Michael looked at the teenager again, this time with a more focused gaze. "I want to help you. Your bravery has earned you a future that you may never have thought possible. I'm going to fund your education fully. You won't have to worry about anything. College, your future, it's all covered. And I'll personally ensure that you're given opportunities for success." The teenager was speechless, his mind trying to process the enormity of what the CEO was offering him. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his heart racing. Why are you doing this for me? I didn't do it for anything like this." Michael smiled warmly. "I know you didn't. You did it because that's what a good person does. And I believe that good people deserve good things. You've already changed my son's life. Now let me change yours." The teenager's eyes welled with tears as the weight of the situation fully hit him. This wasn't just a thank you from a wealthy man. It was a chance at something he had never imagined for himself. A future filled with hope, opportunity, and a chance to build a better life. Michael placed his hand on the teenager's shoulder once again. "You're part of our family now. Don't hesitate to reach out. My family will be here for you, and this is just the beginning." As they walked away from the scene together, the teenager felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The streets no longer seemed as daunting. The challenges of his life now seemed surmountable. He had been given a chance to truly make something of himself, not just for his family, but for his community. He had no idea where this would lead, but one thing was certain: his life had changed forever. And as the CEO and his family drove away, they both felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the fact that their son was safe, but for the young man who had saved him, a young man whose bravery and humility had changed the course of their lives, too. The teenager's courageous act quickly became the talk of the neighborhood and spread far beyond the tight-knit suburban streets. News outlets began to pick up the story, drawing attention to the selfless teenager who had put his own life at risk to save the child of a well-known billionaire. But it wasn't just the act that captivated people's hearts. It was the young man's humility, his lack of desire for recognition, and the sincerity with which he had responded to the crisis. Soon, people began referring to him as a community hero, a term that seemed both fitting and almost surreal to the teenager, who had never thought of himself as anything special. To him, what he did that day was just an instinctual decision, something that needed to be done, and something he would do for anyone in need. But as the story spread, more and more people began to recognize the young man's bravery, and it quickly became clear that his selflessness had touched many hearts. Locals who had witnessed the incident felt inspired to rally behind him. Conversations about the importance of community, responsibility, and bravery buzzed throughout town, and many people began offering to help the teenager in any way they could. As his story made its way to social media, the hashtag #CommunityHero started trending, and support poured in from people across the country. But even with the growing attention and admiration, the teenager remained grounded, choosing to keep a low profile despite the swelling recognition. He had never sought anything from his actions, and he certainly didn't expect the fanfare that followed. However, one person in particular saw this as more than just a single heroic act. Michael Parker, the CEO whose son had been saved, recognized the incredible potential in the teenager. Michael knew that this young man was capable of far more than he realized, and he was determined to help the teenager reach his fullest potential. Through the CEO's assistance, the teenager was admitted to one of the top schools in the state. This wasn't just any ordinary school. It was a prestigious institution known for nurturing future leaders and entrepreneurs. For someone who had never imagined such opportunities, It was nothing short of life-changing. The teenager, now more confident in his abilities, threw himself into his studies with vigor. He excelled in every subject, quickly gaining the respect of his peers and teachers alike. The support Michael had offered didn't stop there. As a part of his effort to help the teenager build a successful future, the CEO arranged for the young man to intern at his company. The teenager, who had always been interested in business but never thought he'd have the chance to get involved, now had a front-row seat to the world of corporate strategy and innovation. During his internship, he learned invaluable skills that not only boosted his confidence, but gave him the tools needed to succeed in the business world. Over time, the teenager's dedication and hard work began to pay off. He rose through the ranks, showing immense promise and a natural aptitude for leadership. The same humility that had saved Michael's son served him well in the business world, allowing him to connect with people from all walks of life and build lasting relationships. The teenager wasn't just building a career. He was slowly but surely paving the way for his future success. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the bond that grew between the teenager and the Parker family. Michael and his wife Sarah were not content with simply offering the young man an internship and a good education. They treated him like family, inviting him to their home for dinners, offering guidance, and supporting him in any way they could. The teenager began spending holidays with the Parkers, sharing meals, laughter, and stories. They celebrated his achievements, big and small, and the teenager began to see them not just as benefactors, but as true friends. Over time, the Parkers became as much a part of his life as his own biological family, and the teenager began to feel a sense of belonging he had never felt before. This bond extended beyond personal connections. Michael and the teenager worked together on several community initiatives aimed at improving opportunities for underprivileged youth. Michael, with his wealth and influence, and the teenager, with his unique perspective and first-hand experience of hardship, combined their efforts to create programs that would help others like him. They worked on mentoring initiatives, educational scholarships, and job placement programs, ensuring that young people from disadvantaged backgrounds had the chance to succeed in ways they had never imagined possible. The teenager's life had been transformed in more ways than he could have ever anticipated. He had not only received a second chance at life through the generosity of Michael Parker, but he had also developed a deep bond with the Parkers and become an advocate for others in need. The ripple effect of his actions, the act of selflessly saving a child's life, had created a wave of change that touched the lives of many others, including his own. Looking back on that fateful day, when he rushed to save the child from the oncoming car, the teenager could hardly believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. It was a moment of courage, but it had set into motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to a brighter future, not just for him, but for others too. The teenager had gone from an unknown young man in a quiet neighborhood to a recognized leader in his community, and through it all, he remained humble, knowing that his actions had been driven by an inherent desire to do what was right. He never sought recognition, yet it found him, and he used it to better himself and his community. What started as one brave act had transformed into an entire life's worth of opportunities, and the teenager couldn't help but wonder how much more he could accomplish with the support and guidance he had been given. The future seemed bright, and he was ready to face it head-on, knowing that the ripple effect of kindness and bravery could create change that lasted for generations.